Benvenuto and welcome to our most recent appuntamento of the Volatile Masterclass. Today at the Volatile Masterclass, we are pleased to have the Alois Lageder Winery join us with Clemens Lageder and Pfisterer, who is the winemaker there. So this is going to be a real treat. Today's focus is going to be on tomorrow. Today's focus is going to be on climate change. And very, very few wineries have as long a relationship with climate change and thinking about and discussing it as Lageder Winery does. Let's see, can we, maybe it's my screen. Let's check and see. There we go. So let me welcome Clemens and Yo.
Bye. Ciao.
Buongiorno. Welcome. Buon pomeriggio a voi.
Thank you.
Before we dive into this, let me just give a little brief background on Volatile for those who are joining for the first time. So my name is Brian Larkin. I founded Volatile in 1990, and this is our 30th anniversary. My background started in 1980 back at UC Davis, where I got my degree in fermentation sciences and worked in the Napa Valley for a few different wineries before moving over to Italy in 1985 and working for Caldo Bosco in Franciacorta. Worked over there as the winemaker for Caldo Bosco through 85, came back to the States and said, God, that was an amazing experience. I don't want to leave that. I don't want to just get another job over here in Napa Valley. How can I bring this to America? So that's what I did and created Volatile, which simply means of the earth. And it's an organization that's focused exclusively on Italy and Italian wines and spirits. We've got about 20 team members at Volatile across the United States. We've got 30 brands owned by about 20 different families. And for me, Italy was a logical choice. I mean, obviously I was out there working, but I think it's all the most exciting, the most dynamic, the most irreverent, and one of the most creative winemaking regions in the world. Our offices are based in Napa, and we've got, 10 varietals in Napa. And in Italy, depending on your count, how many fingers you have, we've got about 600 varietals in Italy. So it's diverse, it's creative. It's one of the most exciting places to make wine. And it goes back to Roman, Etruscan, Greek times. It's right there in the heart of what's been going on for so long. So this is our Winery Direct model. It's up on the screen right now. We have a model that brings wines in directly, that skips national importers and creates greater value for our customers across the board. We work with a very small select group of producers, and we work with producers that we believe are icons in each of the various regions that we work with in Italy. As you can see from the gray areas, there's still some areas that allow us to expand in the future. So we're super optimistic and excited for tomorrow. And speaking of tomorrow, let's jump into today's conversation with Clemens Lageder and Pfisterer. And this is a real treat. So Lageder, when we go back when I said I started Volatile in 1990, the first winery that I began with was the Alois Lageder Winery. We began talking in late 89 and really got the show rolling, I think, in 1990. And Alois and I worked together for many, many years. And he's passed the baton over to his son, Clemens. And it's been an amazing transition, and especially that winery. I mean, generation after generation after generation. It's rare to work with an organization that goes back for hundreds of years. And that's so important, I think, in today's conversation, because it gives us a base, it gives us a starting point from which we can see the future. Most of our conversations when we get to Lageder center around the environment. Lageder, we're going to show a few maps up here just to give you guys an idea of where it's located. But the Lageder winery is in northern Italy. It's located just south of the Austrian border, and it's a bilingual area. They speak both German and Italian. And in fact, the winery where Lageder is based is the southernmost Germanic-speaking village in all of Europe. And it's right there on that most important pass that separates Northern Europe from Mediterranean Europe. And it's a very, very deep valley. It's surrounded by the Alps. It's surrounded specifically by the Dolomites, which define the geology There are alluvial river soils in the bottom there. The Adige River basically flows north and south right down through that valley. And then as you go up the hillsides, up the slopes, you get into all types of different geological terrain and climatic change that Clemens and Yo will get into. It's probably one of the most, I think, diverse wine growing regions in the world. I talked about 600 varietals, and while some of the most important and most well-known and most collectible wine areas in the world, and I'll just throw out a couple like Barolo and Barbaresco and Brunello and all these kind of wines, those are each made from just one varietal. And they're really defined by Prunello Gentile, by Sangiovese, Grosso, by Nebbiolo, etc. And yet here in Alto Adige, Lageder makes over 30 different wines. And I think one of the reasons they do that is because they can do that because of the diversity. And the other reason, which is what we're going to dive into right now, is the leadership and the idea that the way things were isn't necessarily going to be the way things are going to be in the future. And we need to be prepared and curious to be able to do that. By way of introduction, I would say that climate change for many farmers is scary. It's always domani, it's always farther out in the future. And it's something that's difficult to wrap your arms around and really begin to think about and understand, much less plan for, because these things take literally a generation or so to come about. And so it takes a lot of planning and curiosity and honesty for farmers to begin to look at this. And I remember back in the day walking the vineyards with Alois, and I was just checking with Clemens this morning, and he said that it was probably 30 or maybe even 40 years ago that Alois began planting his first experimental vineyards with crazy things like a Cirtico from Greece, and he'll get into that more. But this is an estate that's had a long relationship with honesty and a long relationship with curiosity about what tomorrow is going to bring. I think it was, maybe you can correct me, Clemens, but it was many years ago. I'm guessing, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, when Alois first created a climate conversation at the Lageder Winery and hosted the Max Planck Institute from Germany to come down. And it's such an amazing area that we're talking about right now. In terms of the height, the elevation, the east exposure, west exposure, the soil differences, and these 30 plus different wines that you guys that you make. So let me that's by way of introduction. I think many of the things that we're going to get into. And Clemens and Yo, can you guys take off just a little bit and give us, maybe start with a little bit of history that'll give us some perspective, and then from there into kind of what your vision is and what you guys are seeing and what your thoughts and concerns are.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you very much. So hello to everyone, and yeah, we are here. You and I were here in Magrè, in Alto Adige. So Alto Adige is actually the most northern region in Italy, and yeah, we are a family winery, being run in about 5th and 6th generation. And I think the most beautiful thing what we have here up in the northern part in Alto Adige is we can play, or we have a unique diversity, I think, from Alto Adige, as we said before, Brian. Alto Adige 100 years ago it was part of Austria, so it's still today a beautiful melting pot of two different cultures, of the Austrian culture and the Italian culture. So talking about different dishes, different all this mix of two different cultures. We are here in a place which is diverse from a cultural point of view, from a geological point of view, as we are in the middle of the Alps, talking about really this beautiful dolomitic limestone on one hand. Then in Bolzano, the main town of Alto Adige, is full of porphyry rock. So in a very small area, a huge diversity of different soil types we can play with, and which have huge impact on our vines and on our wines at the very end. And then I think what it's unique about it is, added to these two diversities, we can deal also with a certain altitude. So dealing with, in the Dolomites, dealing with the Alps, we can have vineyards on 500, 600, 700 feet, and the highest vineyard is already on around 4,000 feet planted high. So it's a beautiful diversity we can play with, also from an altitude and from a also microclimate aspect. No? And as I said, we're making wine here since 1823. And I think one thing is for sure, which also probably also challenge, but also one of the most beautiful things what we can do as a producer, as a wine producer, we deal with nature, and nature is of course always changing. No? And so I think it's an interesting topic what we're talking today about. It's about climate change, and the word change is already interesting enough because it makes us aware that there was always a change, and there will always be a change in certain ways. And we probably planted different vines 150 years ago here in Maghreb on 250 meters, 700 feet, and we do today, and we're gonna maybe also plant different grape varieties now than we maybe do in 100 years. No? And the about the climate change for a producer, for a wine producer, is also having vineyards planted or having vine planted. We always plant them for a long term, for 30, 40, 50, 100, 140 years. So if we plant something now, we need to be sure that it works also with a changing climate in 100 years. No? And this is a little bit the interesting part what we have in a certain way in my brain. What is a lot about what you and I were thinking about, and we wanted to get experience about it, I think. And that's the cool thing, to really slow, step by step, getting experience about it. And there are many solutions we can deal with it about it. No?
Exactly. You said that there's always been change. There's change now. There's always been change. I think the obvious question is the rate of change, right? It's how fast are things changing? And it used to take a long time, and now things we can see in our own lifetime, that things are different. Things are changing. Things are moving faster. So as you're looking around, you guys are in a very unique, very special, a very gifted area. I mean, a lot of places, they turn around, they look right, they look left, and they see kind of the same thing. Maybe it's a rolling hill. Maybe they say it's very different over there than it is here. But you are really tucked into an area where you have wines of light and wines of heat. You have wines in the morning and wines, I should say, in the afternoon that get different types of sunlight, and obviously different elevations. Your region, for many people that don't know it, is one of the warmest growing regions in Europe. It's temperature par with maybe Florence down in Tuscany, and yet you still have places where you can move to, different areas that you can look at in terms of places to plant that maybe haven't been under intense viticultural exploration in the past.
That's one big advantage what we have here. We can deal with elevation. So it means that, of course, warm, and it probably is getting faster warmer or drier or whatever. I don't know how temperature and whatever will change, but there will be changes. And of course, we can deal with elevation. That's a huge advantage which we have as producer here in Alto Adige, that from 700 meters. We had here in Maghreb on 700 feet, 100 years ago, planted Riesling. All this Riesling moved up to 2,600, 2,000 feet here in Alto Adige, you know? So probably it will happen also with certain other grape varieties, that they can move high up. The only problem is if you look, for example, on the image, now you have all these forests on high elevation and a beautiful natural landscape. And imagine you would stand up in a mountain in the Dolomites, and you would be surrounded by this beautiful nature in a certain way. No? Putting there vines or vineyards, it's always how you could say that, intervention of human in a certain way. You change landscape, no? So you change from nature to culture in a certain way, to a monoculture even more or less, no? So it's a big, nice advantage. It's a nice possibility to what we could do. We could go higher, but it shouldn't be the only solution, no? And I think we shouldn't only talk about for us or about us, because we need also to figure out what can we do in an area like here on 700 feet. How can we continue to produce wine? No? And in this elevation, we more or less have, for example, Pinot Grigio planted. No? One very important grape variety, or Gewürztraminer planted. Another great variety for this area in Alto Adige for a lower altitude. And here we need to think differently, no? About other possibilities, what we can deal with with the climate change. No?
Because yeah, another thing about change is that not only the climate is changing, but also the taste and the expectations about some wines, about a style of a wine is changing constantly, right? So what we did 20 years ago might not be seen as good nowadays, or vice versa. So that is also something, I think, if you think about change, in general, you can see it as a threat and you can get scared, or you can see it as a chance, and as a chance to try a lot of things without knowing if it's going to be good or bad, but with the chance to learn something in the end and then to move on. That is a nice thing. And what Clemens said about the altitude is also, so we discussed it also here a lot, because as he said, you would try landscape, you would change landscape by bringing up monocultures, but another beautiful thing in that area is also that we have a quite small scale agriculture. So each farmer has let's say 1.5 hectares of apples, 1.5 hectares of wines, and he can live from that. So what we then try as kind of a compromise, if we going up in altitude, we try to do it in a enclosed, in an embedded farm cycle. So if we look for partners who have a high altitude, it's very important for us that there's also somehow other forms of agriculture, not only vines, but if it's also dairy cows or weeds or whatever, that is also a beautiful thing, and it's also something we should focus on in that region, because diversity is also connected to the farmers and to their chance to grow things, because also for apples, also for wines, it's not said that we can do it on the same spots forever. Yeah. And with that,
excellent.
Sorry.
So they're basically, I'm just kind of thinking about what you guys are talking about, and it comes to mind that there are kind of 3 different variables that we can address when we're dealing with this. There's 3 things. There's place where you're farming, the varietals that you choose to plant, and the grape and the rootstock that you're choosing, and then there's the farming techniques that you're choosing to use. So some of those are more difficult to address. You can't really address place that much. I mean, that's kind of where you're located, and that's the beauty of it. Varietals, we're talking about that right now. And let me hear a little bit more about the experimental vineyards, a little bit more about the thinking. So your dad started this 30 and 40 years ago, and as Yo just said, it takes a long time to ask questions, assimilate the information, and kind of learn by doing. So what was planted? How many different varietals are there? You guys have an incredible history that your dad started so many decades ago. And how is that influencing where you think you're going to take this in the future? What are you taking out of those experimental vineyards that you can then go ahead and move forward with?
Yeah, I would say that we are extremely lucky that our father started 30, 40 years ago to experiment with climate change. And so he started to get interested in it. And he started to experiment with grapevines from southern parts of France, from Greece, or whatever. So from more warmer climate in a certain way, like Viognier or Tanat. And so we are looking now, or we're looking at on vineyards or on vines which have with an age of 30 years or so of Tanat and Viognier, and we already have this experience how they developed in the last 30 years. So we were able already to do certain experiments, like with Tanat, with Asirtico, with Roussanne, Massana, and so on, or in Corcho Manzoni, which we can also taste. Now, for example, in Corcho Manzoni is a very interesting grape variety, which is not from the southern part, but it's from the north, from Veneto, but it's known for high acidity. So also, or Chenin Blanc, for example, it's also interesting grape variety. They could maybe fit in a changing climate in a future here as well. No? And on the other hand, we need to think about what we're going to do with Pinot Grigio, which we planted 150, 200 years, or Chardonnay, which has a history here in Alto Adige that is longer than 200 years ago old. No? So here we might find other solutions we can deal with. No? And I think there are not only 3 solutions dealing with climate change, there are plenty of them. We can think about other root systems, different clones, different
trelling system.
Yeah, trelling system. Maybe the pergola is again interesting because it gives you more shade in a certain way. No, the pergola is an old trellising system here, especially in the northern parts of Italy, which is looks like a kind of a roof. No? So it means that the grapes are underneath the leaves, and the leaves give you a certain shade, which is of course for a warmer temperature in future, maybe also positive. No, again here we have things we can play with. No, and we prepared a little game, or yeah, always called it game. We would like to taste a Pinot Grigio with you, which is called Pora. And as I mentioned, Pinot Grigio is a grape variety which is planted here more or less quite a lot. And Pinot Grigio is also a grape variety which can tend to be a little bit broad, can be a little bit flabby sometimes, too alcoholic, and it tends to slightly get overripe fast. No? So here we need to, if we want to continue with Pinot Grigio, and especially Pinot Grigio, what we saw in the last 15 years, nowadays, or let's say 30 years back, the question was always, how can we get our grapes ripe? Nowadays, the question completely changed. Nowadays, our challenge is always, how can we maintain freshness, acidity in our grapes? No? And this is the most challenging thing what we have nowadays in Alto Adige. No? So if we want to continue with Pinot Grigio, we need to focus maybe on different things what we can do naturally in the cellar, on the cellar side. No? So that's why we prepared something for you, and I'll let you as winemaker and enologist do it.
Okay.
Fantastic. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking a look at the climate change. We're going to put on our glasses, and in this case, our glasses are going to be two different wines. We can look at Incrocio Manzoni, we can look at Pinot Grigio, and we can see how you're working with these things in terms of everything that we just mentioned, winemaking, rootstock, trellising, biodynamic farming, etc., in order to go from a situation in the past was about, as you said, about ripeness and about physiological maturity, to a place right now where it's really about finesse. It's really about keeping the wines nervy and acidic and bright and shining. And so this is an opportunity for us to understand kind of what goes on behind closed walls in your thinking, and how are you guys approaching this for the long run? Because for those of you who continue to support the Lageder brand, and those of you who are curious about trying new things here in the States, definitely get a cross section of what they're working with. It's one of the most dynamic, I think, and progressive wineries anywhere. Not in Alto Adige, not in Italy, but anywhere. So let's continue on to kind of your thinking, and what you're looking at.
Yeah, I think what we should point out very clear is all our wines are based on our idea about getting the bottle empty in the end. So about a certain drink flow and sapidity. So what we're striving for is that freshness and preciseness Clemens has talked about. And in the case of Pora, which is a pure Pinot Grigio, we were forced to concentrate on our vineyards nearby Bottom Valley. That means very warm climate in that case, because we don't have other vineyards on higher altitudes. So that was the starting point. So maybe 25 years ago, you could harvest it medium September, mid of September, in a quite fresh character. Nowadays, we start the harvest in the case of the 2018. It's also written always on the back label. We started it on the 20th of August. Gives you the first idea about our striving for freshness, meaning you talked about physiological ripeness. Yes, that is one key aspect, but another key aspect might be the crunchiness of the grape itself. So we want to have it ripe, but we still want to have it crunchy. So when we pick a grape, if we pick a berry and bite in it, it should crack. And that, let's say, perception, we want to transmit in the end over the juice into the wine. So that is the main objective. So we were forced to use these, nowadays I would consider them as a Mediterranean hot climate, not cool climate in the case of these vineyards. So we had to take them into the cellar, and what we realized especially during vintages like 2000, for very hot vintages is that we hardly can harvest it early enough to be on the very fresh side without intervent in a bigger way. So what we then tried is not only to harvest early, but also to take into consideration the whole bunch, the whole cluster. So this wine, is every wine of us is a sum of components. This wine is a sum of many components, each Pinot Grigio. Not always the same vineyard, but very comparable terroir. As Clemens said, bottom valley, it's all trailed on Guyot in that case. It's all on a somehow dolomitic limestone soil, medium aged wines. So we took, in one case, the grapes and did the wine as you do it nowadays, with a directly pressed vinification. So grapes arrive, we press, we let it sediment overnight, and then we rack and let it ferment spontaneously, because this is also something we have pushed a lot in the last years, over the last decades, to ferment with indigenous yeast, which is also considered to be a must with the Demeter standard of biodynamic wines. And then we leave it as long as possible in contact to the whole fermentation lees for the, let's say, for up to 9 months. And then with another component, we didn't press the grapes immediately, but we left it on the press in contact to skins and also to stems over one night, roughly, let's say. It's between 8 or 12 hours, always depending on the situation. So after the 12 hours, we pressed it, and we didn't let it sediment, but we took all of the juice. So no separation of the cloudy, of the dirty part, but all of it. And afterwards, same procedure as with the first one, fermentation with indigenous yeast and long contact to the fermentation lees. And then we come to another important component, which is, we call it pink pourer, which is the whole cluster fermentation, where we do, Alto Adige is, because of its small scale agriculture, very gifted by harvest everything by hand. So not only we are harvesting by hand, everything is harvested by hand, and we take these grapes out of the boxes and put them into a cask gently. So without crushing, without pressing, but with our hands or with a fork, we put them in the cask, and then we fill it up with juice. To be more precise, with the juice of the medium contact overnight maturated Pinot Grigio juice. And then we let it ferment, and after fermentation, we can each year understand that the whole clusters sink down, and we leave them in contact to the juice, to the wine in that case, for another 6 to 9 months, always depending on the vintage, on the vineyard, on our feeling, on our discussions in the cellar team. And then in the end, we can create out of these components, but also out of many other components, a final blend. Everything Pinot Grigio, but comparable terroirs, but different vinification styles. And then we learned somehow over the last few years that, of course, each year has its influence, but we also can take over control a bit out of the cellar part about the style we strive with Pinot Grigio for.
Let me just interrupt for just a second on that slide that we just saw, and even on the samples that are in front of you, just to let people know. So of the 3 different types of Pinot, so Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, and Pinot Noir, white, gray, and black. On the little tiny bottles in the middle, Pinot Grigio is really what we think of as a white grape, but it's really the skins on Pinot Grigio. If you look at them when they're fully mature, it's a very, very dark cluster. So when Yo is talking about whole cluster fermentation or skin contact, be aware that this is a very dark cluster, and they can really have a lot of effect here. In other areas in Italy, like in Friuli, they make ramato, which they give it a little bit of almost a coppery color from the skin. So it's a very, very delicate process that has a lot to do with temperature and the amount of alcohol.
And the interesting and the fun fact now about those components is how it is possible, how it's possible in a natural way to a different method, to a different vinification method in the cellar, to deal with the exact same grapes, or let's say the same area, just another parcel, but same soil type, same altitude, same area. So it's very similar grapes, always Pinot Grigio. Through a different vinification method, you get a complete different perception of freshness. No? So in the first one, you might think that the freshness is okay. I would say it's good. It's a good Pinot Grigio, as you probably would know it. But it can be already a little bit, it can tend to a little bit, to get a little bit flabby, or how you could say, flat. Yeah? Mm-hmm. Second one, already through the skin contact, you get this nerve, you get this tension, you get this in a certain way. You know? You need to imagine that if it would be how if you would buy it on a tomato stand. No? A tomato stand, I don't know if you have experienced it before, but it can be extremely bitter. And if you wait for the right moment at the grape, this bitterness turns to freshness. No? Wait for the right moment to harvest. No? This bitterness turns to freshness, and you give it a certain kick, a certain tension. No? And this already changes the wine between 1 and 2 is completely different already. Just through 12 hours skin contact, you completely change the characteristics of a certain wine, even though it's always from the same area. No? And then the third component would come into play, which is kept on skins and stems for a couple of months in a certain way. So maybe always again an extreme, and through this you get through the tannins from the skin and stem, you get another component and another complexity, and you gain complexity, but in a certain way a vertical complexity, and that's what we love to have in our wines. What we are looking each single year, dealing with a different climate outside, which is obviously every year is different. We need to find possibilities and dealing with different components and another percentage in a certain way to keep always the same style. And this is what you talked about before, trying to make wines which at the very end, our customers, they should be able to empty the bottle by themselves nearly, you know. Maybe they're drunk at the very end, but there should be a certain sapidity, you know. This is what we're looking for, this crunchiness, this sapidity, and this is what we can do with Pinot Grigio. No? So instead of just going high up or changing grape varieties, taking all Pinot Grigio out or taking all the Gewürztraminer, we might also have other possibilities which we can deal on a natural way in the cellar.
Mm-hmm. There's so many different components that you're dealing with, and that people that are curious are able to begin to manipulate and understand. And it's like a chef in the kitchen. It's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. It's not too much salt, but no salt, and you're out of luck. You need just a little taste of this. There's been a lot of studies even about Brettanomyces and saying a little bit of that is not a bad thing because it adds to complexity, right? Complexity factors.
I think if we talk about diversity, we cannot take out of our considerations many different species of yeasts. Also Brettanomyces, we cannot take out of our consideration the volatile acidity, which to a certain point can push a wine very much increase the perception of fruit, and to a certain point it can also be seen as a fault, and each one has a different taste. But diversity is also including the winemaking process, but also all of the microorganisms involved. That is why, yeah, as you said, Brettanomyces we do not consider by the very start of vinification as an enemy. So it can be a part of a wine in the end. We don't want it to be overwhelming, to be dominant, but why not? It's something coming from the vineyard. And if we work with indigenous yeasts, so we have to find strategies how we can embed, in case of Brettanomyces, that taste in a blend. Or in that case of Pora, and we talk about more phenols than Brettanomyces as a somehow unusual taste. When we taste white wine, we are used to have it on a certain level of acidity, certain level of probably also residual sugar, which isn't the case with that wine, but we are not used to a certain bitterness. So for us, also the challenge is to find the right equilibrium or balance between bitterness and also acidity and the flow Clemens talked about. So we have from left to right an increase in phenols, but actually a decrease in acidity. That doesn't include our perception. In some years, we find that way more acidic than that one. Although the overall in the end value is higher here than here. So it's not always following our logic.
So it's changing, it's varying every year. And the variant, maybe the third one could be too bitter already because of its long contact with skin and stems. But at the very end, what we try to do is we just add a couple of a certain percentage of it to a bigger amount. For example, now what I just did is adding the number 3 to number 1 now, and already you can see how number 1 is changing now in the very end. And then maybe you add number 2, so the one which stayed on the skins for a couple of hours, and again here you gain complexity, you change a certain wine in a natural way, and you give it a little twist. You give it, as you said, and a chef, he adds pepper or salt. It's a little bit similar that for this with the second, for example, you get the saltiness, the minerality into the wine. No? And at the very end, Bordeaux 2018, for example, was it's a sum of more than 20 different components, but I would say that these are the 3 main ones. And the 2018 vintage, for example, has 65% of the first component, so directly pressed, approximately 15 from the second one, or 20 from the second one, yeah, and the rest is from the third one. So it's always varying and different. And maybe in warmer vintages we might increase the third one and the second, and in a cooler vintage we might increase the first one. So it's a game that we can play each year, but we also need to understand because it's changing every single year. You know?
That's really beautiful. And so while the weather changes every year, your approach to the climate changes every year, but the real key is stylistic. And if I was going to summarize it, it would be getting toward this brightness, this freshness, this crunchiness, this nerviness with just a hint of that bitter in there, but it's a really good bitter. It's the way that makes things last on the palate longer. And I would argue it makes them pair much, much better with foods. And it's such a pleasure to see so much thought and concern and interest and curiosity going into Pinot Grigio, because for the vast majority of what we see here in the US, it's bland. It falls off your palate. It's like water. It has no aftertaste. It grows like weeds. They plant it in the US, they plant it over there. But it is not something that people have been focusing on. And it's really a shame because there's so much there. And if we can use something that people are already familiar with, that's already well distributed, and we can use that as kind of like a little wedge to get them thinking about Lageder and thinking about the way that you guys are looking at winemaking and blending in particular, you know, that's half the game right there in our favor.
When he arrived in the winery in 2014, right? He said, what a boring grape wine Pinot Grigio would be. No? A couple of years later, he's drinking it every day. No, kidding. But.
Well, that's true. You know, until you dive into stuff and start looking at stuff.
Yeah. But it can be a very interesting grape wine when you play and when you do it right, no? When you deal with it in the right way.
Exactly. We've been talking about blending and whatnot of the way that you're dealing with the fruit. Can you back up just a couple of steps and talk about the fruit in terms of farming, in terms of the philosophy, in terms of using nature that's going to change throughout the year after year after year, and how you're going to deal with that, and through this variability of weather, how you're able to maintain this consistency of quality. And I would argue that you're one of the philosophies that I think you've been talking about today is the idea of diversity, and diversity of the way that things are grown, the way that things are blended, and this overall complexity that we're looking for. So if we translate that and those ideas back into the vineyard, what is some of the diversity that you're looking for in the vineyards, and how through diversity are you able to maintain a very high level of quality from year to year?
Man, it's a long question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make it short. Just tell me about farming and how you look at farming Let's go back to what you said about monoculture. You don't believe in monocultures.
Farming, yeah. So in 2000 or in the 90s, we started with the first experiments with biodynamic farming. In 2004, we converted all our vineyards to biodynamics. We do have family-owned approximately 135 acres vineyards here in Alto Adige, and which are all farmed biodynamically. And plus, we do collaborate with many different farmers all around Alto Adige. Because as we talked before, I think one of the most beautiful things here we have is our diversity, and Chardonnay gets completely different on 4,000 feet and then on 500 feet, for example. Now, and dealing with these different farmers, we can have the possibility to really go to this spot to find the right spot for Riesling, or this spot to find the right spot for Sauvignon, and so on. No? So not all of these farmers are farming biodynamically yet. So we try slowly to motivate them, which is extremely important, not to force them, but to slowly, maybe not train them, could be motivate and train them. And for us, biodynamics, I would say, is more or less trying to think on about a vineyard and as a small, its own small world in a certain way, its own to have a certain holistic approach, holistic view. And as you said before, now it's not about just having vineyards or vines, because I think a healthy agriculture always needs a certain diversity, a biodiversity. And the good farmer maybe 100 years ago was someone who created a certain diversity and a certain biodiversity, having cows, having pigs, having apple trees, having vineyards, and so on. And he knew that only with the manure he was capable to fertilize the soil. And here, but also in Napa or in Burgundy or wherever we talk about agriculture, or about viticulture, where do we have a cow in our neighborhood? So how do we fertilize the soil? No? And of course, all of a sudden in the 80s, 90s, or already before, people started more and more, because the cows went away, or people were focusing on something differently, specializing more in their agricultural business, and slowly we had no possibility to fertilize the soil anymore. And of course, we were forced in agriculture to deal more with chemical fertilizers. So biodynamics for us, it's in a certain way the base of biodynamics is trying to go back to this closed organism or closed farming or system. And of course, then we have certain preparation we can deal with. We consider also the lunar cycle, which is important. It shouldn't be a dogma, it shouldn't be a philosophy or a religion, but there are certain important aspects about the lunar cycle or the planetary cycle as well. Yeah? And I think, this is a little bit what we think about how biodynamics, and this is what, for example, also this wine is produced biodynamically, vinified biodynamically, which on a technical way means no pesticides, only copper and sulfur. That biodynamic preparations, little sulfur, spontaneous fermentation, and these kind of things. Exactly. So for us, a very natural approach. I wouldn't consider it as a natural wine. This is again something different, probably, but a very natural. For us, the most natural approach what we can have. So, and this is something what we slowly try. So not every wine is biodynamic farmed or certified, but hopefully slowly we can get there to have all our partners motivated to work like this. And the other question is something maybe for you.
I've got a question for both of you. So if we're looking at many of the experimentations that you're doing on a regular basis and have been doing since 2014, I would say, of those experimentations, sometimes some interesting things pop out of that. Some are disasters. We never want to talk about them. We blend them out. We form a way. We get rid of them. But some of them are interesting curiosities that work. And sometimes they work on a very small scale. You're like, that was good. Let's try that again. Let's set that aside. Maybe we can develop this into something else. What do we learn from that? And some of these are small, but you're able to bottle those. And some of those bottles we're able to get to the United States. And this is these small little experiments that you're able to do. Can you talk a little about what you were calling the comets? These are things that flash through the sky at 1 billion and they kind of fade out. What's your thinking about those? And for those of you listening here in the United States, we do have those available in the US. They're fascinating, they're curious, they're small, tiny little packs. There we go. Handmade labels, and it's a wonderful opportunity to try something in a phase of creation that are at the same time, I think, fully market ready. Go ahead, Yo.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you brought it also very nice, the picture of the comet, because the comet is not only the symbol of Alois Lageder, but it's also something representing something in the sky which can give you a direction, but which can disappear. So that is about bringing something that does not have the consequence to bring it each year. For us in the production team of Alois Lageder, it's quite important to deliver a high quality year by year for our fixed portfolio. Why we have developed the comets is to keep up a certain freedom in the way of thinking and in the way of working, and to share experiments, but not to be forced each year to deliver the same quality thing. Because if you try out things, as you have already said, it might go wrong, and in the end, probably that is the more important experience than if everything is going right and everything's perfect. So the comets, for me, represent a freedom of sharing and doing things. And another important aspect is to push discussion on wine and on the taste in general, because I think also over the last decades, a lot of standardization in agriculture and for products, for food, has taken over our sense of being aware and perceive things in a right way. So here with the comets, we try to go into extremes. Probably they are more extreme than our fixed portfolio. And probably in some cases, or for some people, they are too extreme. But what they are for sure is there are wines where you can talk a lot and where you can experience a lot, and where our aim is not with the comets to present them as our best wines. Our best wines are the masterpieces and the highest quality line. But the idea is to share them, to push a button in terms of perception, taste, and discussion. So to also get a feedback, is that the right direction? Why is it the right direction? Is not the right direction? So that is for us a very important new, let's say, line in our portfolio, which gives us the possibility to share not only vinification styles, but also experiments which are started 30 years ago in the vineyards.
Gives us the possibility to do whatever we want, actually, no?
Yeah, but we don't want to do it
without needing to deliver.
Exactly.
You know?
But we don't.
There's no pressure. There's no pressure of having to deliver. If you do it one year and it's great, terrific. Just because you come out with a comet doesn't mean you're going to come out with another one next year. It's that same thing. Complete freedom, complete opportunity. And yet at the same time, some of these experiments, they're cool and we like what comes out of them. What are some examples of things that are coming out of the comets? And tell me a little bit about Tanat, and because that's been part of the Comet program as well, and how that's evolving into the portfolio, if at all.
Yeah, I would say that Tanat is probably one of the most promising grape varieties we experienced 30, 40 years ago when we started to plant it. And for example, with Tanat, each single year we did something different. No? So Tanat is something which we planted 30 years ago, but still today we're in the process to understand it right in a certain way. No? So every single year we vinified it differently. For example, once we did a rosé out of Tanat. Tanat is a very, how could say, tannic, concentrated grape variety, you know. So we wanted to see what happens if we use this concentrated tannic grape variety and make a rosé out of it. It turned out really, really nicely. You know? Or another year we put it in only new barrels, which we would never do with the certain wines. We never put them 100% in new barrels, but we wanted to see how Tanat fits in such a thing. You know? So,
sure.
And also extreme, sometimes maybe go beyond extremes, no? And maybe we do something what we probably wouldn't enjoy every day. So also without, what we normally would never do. And this year, for example, there will be a Tanat, which we call Le Tan, which is Tannat Leggero, so Tannat which was harvested very, very early in mid of August, which is also foolish because we normally in mid of August we start with the first white grapes. So having this tannic grape body we already harvested a little bit earlier than expected. No? So it's going from one extreme to the other, trying to understand better certain characteristics of certain grape varieties. This could be a comment, no? And this changes every year, and as a comment does, it comes and goes, and then sometimes it comes back, and sometimes it comes back in a different angle or in a different with a different, how you call it, comment or lips, okay. I don't know. And in a different mood, let's say like this, and this is a little bit the idea which is behind this project of the comments. Yeah.
Terrific. This has been really wonderful. We promised to keep this to 30 minutes, and I'm just looking at the clock, and I think it's almost an hour, so that's about right. Time is flying. I want to thank all of you guys who've been patient to stay on this journey with us. This is really just such an exciting conversation. In one way, it's super sad because there are a lot of things we can do about climate change, and that's a completely different conversation, but a very, very important one. At the same time, given where we're at, it's really a treat to be working with people with the who don't mind experimenting and failing and getting back up again and trying something new, because that's the only way we're really going to get anywhere as we move forward. So thank you guys both for your time, for your tenacity, I think, in continue to get up every day and get back in these vineyards and look at things with a fresh set of eyes every day as what's possible, not just what's happened yesterday, but what's possible tomorrow. And that's really, really important. Did you want to say a few last words?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope you enjoy it, and I don't know if you have any open questions. Let's you can write it, or I don't know you. And what else can we do?
Yeah,
say?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And actually, this distance here looks closer on video conference than it is. It's actually 3 meters, as we should do it in Corona time. So you just have to get rid of this misunderstanding.
You guys have never been apart. No, you guys work beautifully together, and that's part of the success of the story. Thank you all for joining this Volatile Masterclass. On Thursday in 2 days, I'll be speaking with the Nama family, and the next week we're going to dive into some big reds. A week from today, we'll be speaking with Vietti, and the Thursday after that, we'll be speaking with Casanova di Neri. You can go to our website and sign up for those classes, and this conversation will be available on YouTube. You can get to that through the Volatile TV channel, through our website as well. It's a real treat to be able to do these and dive into an individual argomento. Grazie mille per l'attenzione and the dedication. And I really want to thank our team at Volatile, those that are helping today with this broadcast, but also that work every day out in the fields for all of us. It's that contact with the customer that keeps everything moving forward. So, grazie a voi. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.